I never thought the sound of a closing door could feel like a gunshot. But when Evelyn slammed that heavy oak frame shut, the clicking of the lock was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. There I was, 72 years old, standing on the porch of the house my own husband built, holding a single duct-taped suitcase and a framed photo of my son Mark. It was raining. Not a gentle mist, but a cold, stinging downpour that soaked through my thin cardigan in seconds. Through the sidelight window I saw Evelyn, the woman I'd treated like a daughter for 15 years, walking back toward the kitchen. She didn't look back. She didn't even flinch. "Evelyn!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "It's been 3 days since the funeral. Where am I supposed to go?" No answer. Just the flickering glow of the television she'd just turned on. My son's body wasn't even cold in the ground, and I was being discarded like yesterday's trash. I looked down at the photo of Mark in my hand. He was smiling, his eyes crinkled at the corners, the same eyes he'd had since he was a toddler. "I'm so sorry, baby," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect our home. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a cell phone that worked. Evelyn had cut my line from the family plan that morning. I had $42 in my purse and a heart that felt like it had been run through a meat grinder." I started walking down the long driveway, the gravel crunching under my orthopedic shoes. Every step felt like I was leaving a piece of my soul behind. How did it come to this? How does a woman go from being the beloved matriarch to a homeless nuisance in 72 hours? I thought I knew Evelyn. I thought I knew the woman my son loved. But grief doesn't just change people, it unmasks them. And what was hiding behind Evelyn's polished exterior was something I wasn't prepared for. I reached the end of the road and sat on my suitcase under the leaking roof of a bus stop. I was shivering so hard my teeth rattled. I thought about the attic. I thought about the small, locked wooden box Mark told me never to open unless I was at the end of the rope. "Oh, Mark, I'm at the end." And the rope just snapped. As I sat there, a black sedan pulled up. The window rolled down, and I saw a face I hadn't seen in 20 years. A face that held the secret to why Evelyn was so desperate to get me out of that house. The man in the car was Arthur Sterling. He was my husband's younger brother, a man we'd scrubbed from our lives decades ago after he tried to swindle the family business. He looked older, sharper, his eyes like 2 pieces of flint. "Get in, Martha," he said. His voice was like sandpaper. "Before you catch your death." I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to run. But the cold was winning and my legs were numb. I climbed into the leather interior, the smell of expensive tobacco filling my lungs. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" I managed to gasp. "I heard about Mark," he said, not looking at me. "And I know Evelyn. I knew the second the dirt hit the casket she'd toss you out. She's been talking to lawyers for months, Martha. Did you know that?" My heart stopped. Months. Mark was only sick for 6 weeks. Arthur let out a dry, bitter laugh. "She didn't wait for the cancer to take him to start measuring the drapes. She's been looking for the deed to the property. The original deed. The one your husband hid." I clutched my suitcase tighter. The original deed wasn't just for the house. It included the 300 acres of timberland that the local developers had been salivating over for a decade. Millions of dollars. Mark had always told me the land was protected, but he never explained how. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suspicious. "You hate this family." "I hate Evelyn more," Arthur said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "She contacted me. Offered me a cut if I could help her find the loophole in the will. She thinks Mark left everything to her. She thinks you're just a tenant she can evict." He turned to me then, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something that looked like regret in his eyes. "But she's wrong, Martha. Mark wasn't a fool. He knew who he married. He left a failsafe. But he didn't leave it with a lawyer. He left it with you." I thought of the wooden box in the attic. The one Evelyn was probably tearing the house apart to find right now. "I need to go back," I said, my voice gaining a sudden sharp edge. "I need to get into that house." Arthur shook his head. You can't go back through the front door. But you forget. I'm the one who helped build the storm cellar. And there's something in that house Evelyn doesn't know about. Something that's going to turn the will reading tomorrow into a funeral for her reputation. Have you ever felt like a thief in your own life? Arthur dropped me off a mile from the property. The rain had turned to a thick, suffocating fog. I crept through the woods, the branches clawing at my face like skeletal fingers. Every shadow was a threat. I reached the old storm cellar door. Hidden under a pile of rotted plywood and overgrown ivy. My joints ached, screaming at me to stop, but the fire in my chest kept me moving. I pulled the rusted handle. It groaned, a long, slow metallic shriek that sounded like a dying animal. I froze, holding my breath. I waited for the porch light to flick on, for Evelyn to come screaming out with the police. Nothing. Only the sound of the wind. I slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and old memories. I climbed the narrow wooden stairs that led directly into the pantry. As I reached the top, I heard voices. Evelyn was in the living room. She wasn't alone. "It's not here, Greg," she hissed. "I've checked every floorboard, every closet. If that old bat hit it, we're screwed." "Relax," a man's voice replied. It was Greg Miller, Mark's best friend. My stomach turned. "The will reading is tomorrow morning. The lawyer said the electronic copy on file leaves the estate to the spouse. Without the physical codicil Mark kept raving about, that old lady has zero leverage. She's probably halfway to a shelter by now." "I should have burned her clothes when I had the chance," Evelyn muttered. I heard the clink of ice in a glass. "I want this house sold by the end of the month. I can't stand the smell of her lavender perfume anymore. It smells like decay." I stood in the darkness of the pantry, tears stinging my eyes. Okay, that was me to them. I wasn't the woman who had cooked them Sunday dinners for a decade. I wasn't the woman who had nursed Mark through his final, agonizing weeks while Evelyn stayed late at the office. I was just a smell they wanted to scrub away. I waited until I heard them go upstairs. I waited until the house fell into a heavy, uneasy silence. Then I crept toward the attic stairs. Found the box. It was tucked behind a false wall in the cedar closet, just where Mark said it would be. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. It wasn't locked with a key. It was locked with a 4-digit code. I tried Mark's birthday. Nothing. I tried his wedding anniversary. Nothing. I sat on the dusty floor, feeling defeated. Then, I remembered I punched in the date we planted the first oak tree in the front yard. Blick. The lid popped open. Inside wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a digital recorder and a velvet pouch. And when I pressed play, the first 3 words out of my son's mouth made me drop the box in horror. The recording didn't start with a greeting. It started with a cough, that wet, rattling sound that had haunted my sleep for months. Then Mark's voice, thin but clear, filled the dusty attic. "Hey, Mom. If you're hearing this, it means I was right. It means Evelyn didn't wait for the grass to grow over me before she showed her teeth." I leaned my head against the cold cedar wall, tears carving tracks through the dust on my cheeks. It felt like he was sitting right there next to me, his hand on my shoulder. "I loved her, Mom. I really did. Or maybe I loved the woman I thought she was. But about 6 months ago I found the bank statements. She wasn't just spending. She was draining the accounts into an offshore shell company. And then, got sick. And she didn't look sad. She looked impatient." A sob escaped my throat, but I pressed my hand over my mouth. Downstairs I heard a floorboard creak. I held my breath until the house went silent again. "The pouch, Mom," the recording continued, Mark's voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look in the velvet pouch. There's a key to a safe deposit box at the downtown branch of First National. It's not in my name. It's in yours. I set it up 5 years ago, right after Dad died. Inside is the original deed, the one signed by the governor in 1948, and a second will. A real will. One that was witnessed by Arthur." Arthur. My heart hammered. The man who had just picked me up from the bus stop. The man who had supposedly swindled us. I know what you're thinking, Mark said, as if he could see my confusion. You're thinking Arthur is the villain. But Dad told me the truth before he passed. Arthur didn't swindle the business. He saved it from a lawsuit Dad caused. And they staged the falling out to protect Arthur's assets from the creditors. It was a lie to keep the family safe. Arthur has been my silent partner this whole time. He's the only one you can trust. The recording clicked off. I sat there in the dark, my world spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a facade. My devoted daughter-in-law was a thief. My criminal brother-in-law was a guardian. And my son, my sweet boy, had spent his final months playing a high-stakes game of chess against his own wife just to make sure I'd have a roof over my head. I grabbed the pouch and stood up, my knees cracking. I had to get to that bank. But as I turned to leave the attic, the light clicked on. Evelyn was standing in the doorway, a glass of wine in one hand and a fireplace poker in the other. Her eyes weren't crying. They were cold, dead, and lethal. I knew I heard the ghost of a pathetic old woman, Evelyn said. She took a slow sip of her wine, her gaze landing on the wooden box in my hand. Give it to me, Martha. Now. I didn't move. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. The fear that had kept me shivering at the bus stop was gone, replaced by a white-hot embers of maternal rage. You killed him, didn't you? Asked my voice steady. Maybe not with a weapon, but you broke his heart until it just stopped beating. Evelyn laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the rafters. Mark was a weakling, Martha. Just like his father. He sat on millions of dollars of land and lived like a middle-class boor. I gave him the best years of my life, and what did I get? A suburban house and a mother-in-law who smells like mothballs. I deserve that land. I've earned it by putting up with this family. She stepped forward, the fireplace poker dragging across the floor with a metallic scree. The box, Martha. I won't ask again. You're 72. People slip on attic stairs all the time. It's tragic, really. Grieving mother loses her balance. The police won't even look twice. You forgot one thing, Evelyn, I said, clutching the velvet pouch inside my pocket. What's that? She sneered. I'm not the only one who knows you're a monster. Just then, the sound of a heavy engine roared in the driveway. Headlights swept across the attic window, blinding her for a split second. It was Arthur. He didn't just pull up. He slammed his horn, a long, deafening blast that shattered the silence of the neighborhood. Evelyn cursed, glancing toward the window. I didn't waste the moment. I lunged past her, my shoulder clipping her arm. She swung the poker, but it hissed through empty air, smashing into a stack of old suitcases. I scrambled down the attic stairs, my heart feeling like it was going to burst through my ribs. I didn't go for the front door. I knew Greg was down there. I went for the window in the mudroom. I threw it open and tumbled out into the wet grass just as Arthur's car skidded to a halt. Get in! Arthur roared. As we peeled away, I looked back. Evelyn was standing on the porch, screaming into the night. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. We have the key, I panted, showing Arthur the pouch. He didn't smile. He just checked the clock on the dashboard. The bank opens in 4 hours. But we have a problem, Martha. Greg isn't just Evelyn's friend. He's the junior partner at the law firm handling the will. They've already filed the paperwork to freeze all of Mark's assets, including your safe deposit box. Have you ever sat in a diner at 4 a.m., watching the steam rise off a cup of burnt coffee, knowing that in a few hours, your entire life will be decided? Arthur and I sat in a booth at the back of a 24-hour truck stop. He had a laptop open, his fingers flying across the keys. I just stared at the velvet pouch on the table. Inside was a small brass key. It looked so ordinary. It was small. It was hard to believe it held the power to destroy Evelyn's world. They flagged the account, Arthur muttered, rubbing his eyes. Greg moved fast. If you walk into that bank and try to open that box, the manager is going to call the firm. They'll claim you're mentally unfit, that you're confused and stealing from the estate. They'll have you in a psych ward before the sun sets. So what do we do? Yes. I felt a wave of exhaustion threatening to pull me under. If we can't get the deed, the will reading at 10 a.m. is going to be a slaughter. Arthur looked at me, and for a second I saw the young boy he used to be, the one who used to hide in the woods to avoid his father's temper. We don't go to the bank, Martha. We make the bank come to us. He turned the laptop screen around. He'd hacked, or maybe just navigated, into the law firm's internal calendar. Greg is meeting Evelyn at 8 a.m. at the firm to review the documents before the formal reading. They think they've won. They think you're gone. But Mark's lawyer, the senior partner, Mr. Henderson, he's an old-school guy. He doesn't know what Greg is doing behind his back. He's currently at his vacation home 3 hours away, planning to Zoom into the meeting. Arthur pulled a cell phone out of his pocket. I have Henderson's private number. Took the phone. My hand was shaking. I thought about the way Evelyn looked at me, the way she treated my son's memory like a stepping stone to a paycheck. I'll do more than that, I said, my voice hardening. I'm going to give him the one thing Greg and Evelyn can't fake. I opened the velvet pouch again. It wasn't just a key inside. Tucked into the lining was a tiny, high-capacity flash drive. Mark had been an IT genius. He knew a paper trail could be burned, but a digital trail that lives forever. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a sleepy, dignified voice answered. Hello, Mr. Henderson, I said, staring at my reflection in the dark diner window. This is Martha. I'm calling to tell you that there's been a murder. Not of a person, but of a legacy. And I need your help to perform the autopsy. There's a specific kind of silence that fills a high-end law office at 8 in the morning. It's thick, smelling of expensive floor wax and old secrets. I stood in the lobby of Miller and Henderson, clutching my tattered purse. My coat was still damp from the rain, and I knew I looked like a woman who had spent the night in a diner booth, which was exactly what I wanted. Evelyn and Greg were already in the conference room. I could see them through the glass partitions, laughing, sharing a pastry, looking for all the world like a grieving widow and a supportive friend. When the receptionist buzzed them and said I was here, Evelyn's face transformed. The smile didn't just fade. It curdled. She marched out into the lobby, her heels clicking like a metronome of malice. Martha, how did you even get here? I told you the locks are changed for a reason. You're trespassing. I'm here for the reading, Evelyn, I said, my voice low and steady. I didn't look at Greg, who was hovering behind her with a look of smug pity. The reading isn't for 2 hours, and frankly, your presence is a formality we can skip, Greg chimed in, adjusting his silk tie. We've reviewed the filed documents. The house, the accounts, the timberland. It all reverts to the surviving spouse. You're just making this harder on yourself, Martha. Go back to the motel we found for you. We'll send your social security checks there. I didn't go to a motel, Greg, I said. I looked him dead in the eye. And I didn't come here to beg. The elevator doors behind me slid open. Arthur stepped out. He wasn't in his grease-stained work clothes anymore. He was wearing a suit that looked older than I was, but he carried himself with the weight of a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. Evelyn's jaw dropped. Arthur, what is this, a family reunion for the failures? Actually, Arthur said, stepping up beside me, it's an audit. Just then, the large monitor on the conference room wall flickered to life. It was the Zoom link for the senior partner, Mr. Henderson. But he wasn't in his vacation home. He was sitting in his office at the downtown branch of the bank, and behind him stood 2 men in dark suits who definitely weren't lawyers. You ever see the blood drain out of someone's face all at once? It's a fascinating thing to watch. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat through the speakers. Evelyn, Gregory, I'm glad you're both there. I was just having a very enlightening conversation with Mrs. Martha here about an hour ago. She sent me some digital files that required immediate verification. Greg stepped toward the screen, his confidence wavering. Sir, whatever Martha told you, she's clearly distraught. The grief over Mark has made her. Quiet, Greg, Henderson snapped. I'm at the First National Bank. I've just exercised my power of attorney over the dormant estate accounts, the ones you told me didn't exist. It seems Mark left a very specific set of instructions regarding a safe deposit box. One that could only be opened in the event of his death if his mother was no longer residing in the family home. Evelyn gripped the back of a chair so hard her knuckles turned white. That's impossible. Have the will. I have the signed copy right here. You have a copy, Evelyn, I said, stepping into the conference room. Felt 10 feet tall. But Mark knew you'd find that one. He kept it in the desk drawer as bait. He wanted to see if you'd actually try to use it to kick me out. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and set it on the mahogany table. This contains the GPS coordinates of the original will, buried in a waterproof casing under the oak tree we planted 30 years ago. But more importantly, it contains the logs of every offshore transfer you made during my son's illness. It turns out, embezzling from a dying man's medical fund is a federal offense. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the lungs. Greg backed away from Evelyn as if she had suddenly caught fire. I didn't know about the offshore accounts, he stammered. I was just handling the real estate. Save it for the Bar Association, Greg, Henderson said coldly. But there's one more thing. Martha, would you like to play the final file for them? The one dated the night before Mark passed. I pressed play on the laptop on the table. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. It wasn't Mark's voice this time. It was a recording from a hidden nanny cam Mark had installed in his bedroom, the one Evelyn thought was just a smoke detector. The video showed Mark, pale and weak, lying in bed. Evelyn was standing over him. She wasn't holding his hand. She was holding a pen and a document. Just sign it, Mark. Her voice on the video was a hiss. If you sign the land over now, I'll make sure your mother gets into a decent home. If you don't, I'll make sure she spends her final years in a state-run facility where they don't even check the bedsores. Is that what you want for her? Mark's voice was a mere whisper. You're a monster, Evelyn. I'm a survivor, she replied on the screen. And you're a dead man. Sign it. The video cut to black as Evelyn leaned over him, trying to force the pen into his limp hand. I looked at Evelyn. She looked like a cornered animal, wild, desperate, and stripped of all her pretenses. The grieving widow was gone. In her place was a woman who had tried to blackmail a dying man with his own mother's safety. The police are downstairs, Evelyn, Arthur said softly. And the bank has already frozen the offshore accounts. You aren't getting the land. You aren't getting the house. In fact, you aren't even getting your car. It's registered to the estate, and the estate is now officially under Martha's sole control. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat down in the expensive leather chair, her eyes fixed on the black screen of the laptop. She had played for everything, and she had lost it all in the span of 10 minutes. As the officers entered the room to escort her out, I walked up to her. I didn't slap her. I didn't yell. I leaned down and whispered something in her ear, one final truth that Mark wanted her to know. A truth that made her finally break down and sob. I thought seeing her in handcuffs would feel like a victory. I thought I'd feel a surge of triumph as the officers led Evelyn out of that glass wall. Not for her. Never for her. But for the 15 years my son spent loving a ghost. For the birthdays, the Christmases, and the quiet mornings where he looked at her and saw a partner, while she looked at him and saw a ledger. Greg was already in a corner, whispering frantically into his desk phone, likely calling a lawyer of his own. Mr. Henderson's voice crackled through the Zoom speakers one last time. Martha, Arthur, I've seen enough. My firm will be filing a formal motion to void every document Greg touched in the last 6 months. The estate is yours. The house is yours. And the timberland. Well, the conservation easement Mark set up in secret. It's ironclad. No developer will ever touch a single leaf on those trees. Arthur let out a breath he'd been holding for 20 years. He looked at me, his eyes wet. We did it, Martha. We finally brought him home. But I wasn't home yet. I still had the smell of that diner on my clothes and the chill of the rain in my bones. I walked out of that office, past the stunned receptionists, and into the bright, unforgiving morning sun. The city was moving, people rushing to work, grabbing coffee, living their lives, completely unaware that a war had just ended on the 12th floor. Where to? Arthur asked, unlocking the door to his old sedan. I looked at the velvet pouch in my hand. The house, Arthur. I need to open the windows. It smells like someone else's life in there, and I need to let the fresh air in. As we pulled into the driveway of the estate, I saw something that made my heart stop. There was a white van parked in front of the garage. 2 men were carrying a heavy oak desk toward the back of it. Evelyn hadn't just kicked me out. She'd already started selling the furniture. "Drop it," I said. The 2 men froze. They looked from me to the house, then to Arthur, who was stepping out of the car with a look that suggested he'd be happy to help them move, straight into the bushes. "We were hired by a Mrs. Evelyn," one of them started. "Mrs. Evelyn is currently indisposed," I interrupted. I walked up to the desk, my husband's desk. The wood was scarred with decades of ink and sweat. "Put it back in the study, exactly where you found it. Then get off my property." They didn't argue. They saw the fire in my eyes, the kind of fire that only burns in a woman who has lost everything and clawed it back from the dirt. Once they were gone, I walked into the house alone. The silence was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. It was the expectant silence of a house waiting to be lived in again. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the curtains, the frames. Evelyn had stripped the photos of Mark from the hallway, leaving pale rectangles on the wallpaper like scars. I went to the kitchen and put on a pot of tea. My hands were finally still. I sat at the small breakfast table and looked out at the woods, the trees Mark had protected, the land that had almost been his undoing. Arthur came in a few minutes later, carrying my duct-taped suitcase. He set it by the door and sat across from me. "I talked to the DA," he said quietly. "Between the offshore accounts and the video evidence of the coercion, she's looking at 10 years. Minimum." I nodded, sipping the tea. It was bitter, but it was warm. "And the money, Arthur?" "The money she took. The bank caught most of it before it cleared the shell company," he said. "There's enough to fix the roof, Martha. And enough to make sure you never have to worry about a bus stop again." We sat in silence for a long time, watching the shadows stretch across the lawn. But then, Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. "I found this in the mailbox on my way in. It's addressed to you. It's from the hospice center where Mark spent his last night." I didn't open it right away. I waited until Arthur left, until the sun dipped below the horizon and the house was filled with the soft blue glow of twilight. I sat in Mark's favorite armchair, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne and the peppermint tea he used to drink. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal paper, covered in Mark's messy, hurried scrawl. "Mom," it began. "If you're reading this, it means the storm has passed. It means Arthur did his job, and you're back in your chair. I'm sorry I had to make you a soldier in this war. I'm sorry I couldn't just leave you in peace. But I knew that if I didn't give you a reason to fight, the grief would eat you alive before the cold did." Choked back a sob. He knew. Even as he was dying, he was worried about my spirit. "Evelyn thinks she won because she's young and fast and greedy. But she forgot what you taught me, Mom. She forgot that a house isn't built of bricks. It's built of the people who stood their ground inside it. Use the money. Sell the timberland to the state for a park. Call it the Mark and Martha Sanctuary. Let the kids run where I used to hide. And Mom, don't be afraid to be happy. The will reading wasn't about the money. It was about making sure the last chapter of your life was written by you, not her." I folded the letter and tucked it into the velvet pouch. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I didn't even know I was carrying. For weeks, I'd felt like a victim, a discarded, broken old woman. But Mark had seen me as a warrior. He'd gambled everything on the belief that I was strong enough to face the truth and win. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark silhouette of the trees. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a guardian. But as I turned to go to bed, I noticed a flicker of light in the old storm cellar. A light that shouldn't have been there. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Arthur. I walked out into the cool night air, my flashlight cutting a path through the fog. I reached the cellar door and pulled it open. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an intruder. It was a small, stray dog, a scruffy terrier mix, shivering in the corner, hiding from the remnants of the storm. He looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, the same way I must have looked at that bus stop. "It's okay," I whispered, reaching out a hand. "You're safe now. You're home." I carried him back into the kitchen, wrapped him in a warm towel, and gave him a bowl of milk. As he lapped it up, his tail gave a tiny, tentative thump against the floor. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. One day you're being kicked out into the rain, and the next you're the one opening the door for someone else. Evelyn thought she could take my life because she thought my life was my possessions. She thought that by taking my house, my keys, and my dignity, she was erasing me. But you can't erase a person who knows who they are. You can't steal a legacy that was built on love instead of greed. I realized then that the will Mark left wasn't just a legal document. It was a testament. A testament to the fact that justice isn't something that just happens. It's something you have to be brave enough to claim. People will try to tell you that you're too old, too weak, or too tired to fight. They'll tell you to take what's left and fade away quietly. Don't listen to them. Your voice is the only thing they can't take unless you give it to them. Hold on to it. Use it. Because even in the middle of the darkest storm, there is a key waiting to be found. I'm Martha, and this is my home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.